You're pathetic dead weight, Dad. The world's better off without losers like you. My son Trevor said this while abandoning me to a pride of lions in the middle of the African savannah. He was live streaming it to 67,000 viewers, laughing as he drove away in his Land Rover Defender. What he didn't know was that I owned the entire preserve he was performing on. His viral humiliation stunt was about to cost him everything he never knew he had. See, sometimes the quiet ones aren't quiet because they're weak. They're quiet because they don't need to prove anything to anyone. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. I just pulled out my satellite phone and made a call that would change both our lives forever. If you're watching this, please subscribe and let me know where you're watching from, because respect is universal, but entitlement always gets exposed. Here's how my son learned that attacking your father on the internet can cost you everything you never knew you wanted. Let me back up. I'm Charlie Morrison, 59 years old, and for the past 15 years, I've been what most people would call invisible. After retiring from my job in park maintenance, I lived quietly in a small rental in Portland, Oregon, drove a 10-year-old Honda Civic, shopped at thrift stores, kept to myself. My son Trevor saw me as exactly what I appeared to be, a failure who couldn't provide for his family. At 32, he'd built a successful career as a wildlife photographer with 245,000 Instagram followers. His bio read, "Capturing Africa's soul, one shot at a time." The irony wasn't lost on me. Trevor had been planning this safari for months, a 3-week trip to Kenya's Masai Mara, all expenses paid. By him, he claimed. The Land Rover Defender alone cost $185,000. His camera equipment was worth more than my annual rent. "Dad, I'm bringing you along as a charity case," he told me over dinner at a Portland steakhouse that cost more than I spent on groceries in a month. "Consider it my gift to the man who gave me nothing." I nodded, smiled, let him pay the $200 check while he explained how his wildlife photography was real work, unlike my meaningless maintenance job. The thing about being underestimated is that people tell you things they shouldn't. Trevor spent the entire flight to Nairobi explaining how this safari would launch his international career. He'd already been in contact with National Geographic, he said. They were interested in his work. "This trip is going to change everything for me, Dad." "Too bad, you'll probably just slow me down." I listened, took notes, mentally. Trevor had no idea that every connection he was bragging about, every door he was hoping to walk through, had my name somewhere in the paperwork. But I wasn't ready to tell him that yet. The papers in my leather bag told a different story than the one my son believed. Financial documents that would have shocked him, contact lists that included presidents and prime ministers, bank statements showing annual donations larger than most people's lifetime earnings. Trevor saw the bag as another sign of my pathetic attempt to appear important. "What's in there, Dad? Your maintenance manual collection?" "Just some reading material," I said. We landed in Nairobi on October 15th, 2024. David Reynolds, the safari director, met us at the airport personally. Unusual for standard clients, though Trevor didn't notice. David had been my operational partner for over a decade, but his greeting was perfectly professional. "Welcome to Kenya, gentlemen. I trust your flight was comfortable." Trevor immediately started filming for his social media. "Day 1 in Africa, guys. About to show you some incredible wildlife content hopefully my old man can keep up." David's eyes met mine briefly. I shook my head almost imperceptibly. Not yet. The drive to Sunset Ridge Private Conservancy took 4 hours through increasingly remote terrain. Trevor live-streamed the entire journey, narrating for his followers about his big break opportunity and his tag-along father who needed some adventure before he gets too old. The comments were rolling in, thousands of them. Most were supportive of Trevor's content, but I noticed a few questioning his treatment of his father. Trevor dismissed them quickly. "Don't worry about the old man, guys. He's tougher than he looks. Probably." As we approached the conservancy gates, I saw something that made my chest tight with suppressed emotion. A bronze plaque mounted on natural stone, Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust, founded 2009, protecting Africa's future. Trevor drove right past it without reading it. That first evening at dinner, I began to understand exactly what my son stood to lose if I stayed quiet. The dining tent was elegant,
Mahogany tables, crystal glasses, views of the Mara River where hippos surfaced like living islands. Trevor held court with the other guests, his camera constantly recording. 8 wealthy Americans, a retired British couple, 2 German wildlife enthusiasts. "My dad here used to maintain parks in Oregon," Trevor announced during the appetizer course, his voice carrying that particular tone children use when they're embarrassed by their parents. "I guess you could say wildlife runs in the family. I just took it to the next level." Polite laughter. I cut my Impala steak and said nothing. "In fact," Trevor continued, warming to his theme, "this whole trip is kind of my gift to him. He never got to travel when I was growing up. Money was always tight, you know. So now that I've made it, I figured I'd show him what success looks like."
The German woman, Dr. Ingrid Fischer, leaned forward with interest. "How wonderful that you're able to share your achievements. What kind of work do you do, Mr. Morrison?" "Wildlife photography," Trevor answered before I could speak. "I've got almost 250,000 followers, and I'm in talks with Nat Geo for a feature spread. This safari is basically my audition." I noticed David Reynolds listening from the service area, his expression carefully neutral. "And you, sir?" Dr. Fisher asked me directly. "Retired," I said simply. Trevor laughed. "Dad's being modest. He spent 30 years maintaining city parks, mowing grass, fixing playground equipment. Honest work, but not exactly glamorous." What Trevor didn't know was that Dr. Fisher sat on the board of the International Wildlife Protection Alliance, an organization that had received substantial funding from a particular anonymous donor for the past 8 years. Her presence here wasn't coincidental. After dinner, I walked alone to the observation deck. The African sky was a cathedral of stars, and the sounds of the savannah created a symphony I'd helped preserve for over a decade. This land, these animals, the very infrastructure allowing privileged tourists to experience this wilderness safely. It existed because of choices I'd made years ago. My satellite phone buzzed. Amanda Foster, my foundation attorney, calling from Portland. "Charlie, I have the final paperwork for the Kenya expansion. Another $800,000 for anti-poaching efforts. Should I proceed?" "Yes," I said quietly. "And Amanda, I may need you to send some employment verification documents soon." "Everything all right?" "Just family business." "Understood. The documents will be ready within an hour." I ended the call and found Trevor filming a night scene by the river, his followers watching him perform confidence he'd never actually earned. "What up, Africa Squad?" "Day 1 down, and tomorrow we're going deep into lion territory. Can't wait to show you some epic content." He noticed me approaching and included me in his frame. "Say hi to my dad, everyone. He's probably never seen this many people watching him at once." The comment count was climbing toward 15,000. Trevor basked in the attention, but I was reading the responses. Many were asking about his disrespectful treatment of his father. Some were questioning his credentials. One comment made me pause. "Isn't this the Morrison Conservancy?" Thought that place was privately owned. Trevor didn't see it, but I did. "Dad, you should go get some rest. Tomorrow's a big day, and I need you to try not to embarrass me in front of the cameras." "I'll do my best," I said. Back in my tent, I opened my leather briefcase. Inside were documents that would have rewritten Trevor's entire understanding of his world. The Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust Incorporation papers showing my signature as founder and primary beneficiary, annual budgets exceeding $3.2 million, correspondence with the Kenyan Wildlife Service bearing official seals, letters of recommendation I'd written for conservation fellowships, including one for a National Geographic photographer position that Trevor had applied for 3 weeks ago. He had no idea that his big break opportunity existed because I'd endowed the fellowship program 2 years earlier. The application was still on my desk back in Portland, right next to the rejection letter I hadn't sent yet. Trevor's entire career had been built on connections he didn't know he had. Opportunities that existed because of money he didn't know came from me. Access to locations and contacts that were available to him only because of who his father actually was. Tomorrow, he was planning to film himself conquering the African wilderness while making his father look like a burden. He was about to learn that some performances have consequences you can't edit out. I closed the briefcase and tried to sleep, knowing that in 12 hours, everything would change. The next morning started at 5:30 a.m. with coffee and the kind of East African sunrise that makes you believe in something larger than yourself. Trevor was already performing for his phone, streaming live to his early-rising American audience. Morning, wildlife warriors. Trevor here, about to take you on the adventure of a lifetime. We're heading into serious lion territory today. I sipped my coffee and watched him work. He was genuinely talented behind a camera, I had to admit. His composition was professional, his narration engaging. Under different circumstances, I would have been proud. Unfortunately, I've got my elderly dad tagging along today, he said, panning the camera to include me. Hope he can keep up with the real wildlife photographers. The comment section exploded with responses, most supportive, but a growing number questioning his attitude. David Reynolds approached our Land Rover with the morning briefing. Gentlemen, we'll be tracking the Ankara Pride today. 5 adults, 3 cubs. They've been active near the Talek River. Perfect, Trevor said. My followers are going to love this. As we loaded into the vehicle, I noticed David's subtle deference, opening my door first, ensuring my seat had the better camera angle, small courtesies that went unnoticed by my son but weren't accidental. Mr. Morrison, David said quietly as Trevor filmed B-roll of the landscape. The morning reports show excellent conditions for wildlife viewing. Thank you, David. I'm sure it will be memorable. Our eyes met briefly. He understood. The drive took 40 minutes through acacia woodlands and open grassland. Trevor maintained a running commentary for his audience, occasionally including dismissive remarks about his amateur co-pilot. Don't worry, guys. I'll make sure we get the good shots, even if Dad gets in the way. At 9:15 a.m., we found the pride. 5 lionesses resting under a cluster of fig trees, their tawny bodies barely visible against the golden grass. 3 cubs played nearby, tumbling over each other in the kind of scene that makes wildlife photography careers. Trevor's excitement was genuine and infectious. Oh my God, guys, this is incredible. Look at those cubs. For 20 minutes, he was the professional photographer I knew he could be. Respectful distance, excellent composition, genuine appreciation for the animals. His follower count climbed past 67,000 live viewers. Then the cubs started moving closer to our vehicle. This is it, Trevor whispered to his audience. This is the shot that's going to change everything. He directed David to reposition the Land Rover for better lighting. The engine noise disturbed the adult lionesses. They stood, alert now, protective instincts activated by the proximity to their young. Trevor, I said quietly, we should give them space. Dad, please, I know what I'm doing. This is professional work. One of the lionesses began moving toward us with that fluid, predatory grace that reminded you these were apex predators, not house cats. Sir, David said carefully, perhaps we should— Just a few more shots, Trevor interrupted. He was leaning out of the vehicle now, camera extended, completely focused on his footage. The lioness was 40 feet away. 30, 20. Trevor, I said, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned in decades of actual wilderness management. Sit down, now. He whirled around, angry at the interruption to his content creation. Do not tell me how to do my job. You spent your life mowing grass. I'm a real photographer. The comment section was going wild. 68,000 people watching in real time as my son prioritized social media over basic safety. You're embarrassing me in front of my audience, he hissed. Just sit there and try not to ruin this for me. The lioness was 15 feet away now. David's hand was on the ignition key. Mr. Trevor, David said urgently, we need to move, now. 5 more seconds. That's when the lioness charged. Not a full attack. A warning rush, the kind experienced guides recognize as a mother protecting her cubs. But to inexperienced eyes, it looked like certain death. David gunned the engine. Trevor fell backward into his seat, his phone clattering onto the floor of the Land Rover. The live stream captured everything. The lioness's approach, Trevor's panic, the hasty retreat. Holy shit! Holy shit! Did you guys see that? The comment count exploded. 70,000 viewers. 75,000. That was incredible. We almost died. This is the kind of authentic content you can't get anywhere else. I looked at David. He looked back. We both recognized what had just happened. A completely avoidable situation created by prioritizing performance over wisdom. Dad, did you get that on your phone? I need backup footage. No, I said simply. What do you mean, no? This was the shot of a lifetime. It was dangerous and unnecessary. Trevor's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. His audience was watching this argument in real time. You know what your problem is, Dad. You're stuck in the past. You don't understand modern media. You don't understand success. You spent your whole life playing it safe, and that's why you never accomplished anything. The comment section was turning. Viewers were calling him out now, for risking the animals, for disrespecting safety protocols, for humiliating his father publicly. But Trevor was too focused on his performance to notice. This is what separating the professionals from the amateurs looks like, people. Some of us take risks for the perfect shot. David drove us back to camp in silence. I watched the landscape roll past and thought about consequences, about the difference between courage and recklessness, about respect earned versus respect demanded. Trevor spent the entire drive editing his footage, preparing to upload the encounter as proof of his fearless professionalism. He had no idea that his breakthrough moment had just been witnessed by people who would remember his choices for very different reasons than he hoped. The afternoon would bring bigger tests. Back at camp, I excused myself for a walk while Trevor uploaded his morning footage and basked in the comments from his viral lion encounter. The afternoon heat was intense, but I needed to think. The Sunset Ridge Conservancy stretched for nearly 50,000 acres of pristine African wilderness. Every trail I walked, every ranger station, every water point that sustained the wildlife population, they existed because of decisions I'd made in Portland boardrooms years ago. At the main administration building, I found exactly what I was looking for. A wall display case containing the Conservancy's founding documents, partnership agreements, and donor recognition, right there, under protective glass. Primary benefactor, Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust, Portland, Oregon. Annual contribution, $520,000 USD. Below that, a photograph from 2018, me shaking hands with the Kenyan Minister of Wildlife as we signed the expanded protection agreement. I was wearing the same weatherproof jacket I had on today. Dr. Fisher, the German wildlife advocate from dinner, was studying the display when I approached. Fascinating history, she said. The Morrison Trust has been instrumental in East African conservation. Do you happen to know anything about the Foundation's work, Mr. Morrison? A little, I said. She pointed to my photograph. The founder is quite reclusive. Very few public appearances, but his impact has been extraordinary. Some of us in the conservation community have wondered if he might be related to the Morrison family visiting this week. It's possible, I said. Her eyes widened slightly as she looked from the photograph to my face. The resemblance is quite striking, she said carefully. I smiled and continued my walk. At the vehicle maintenance shop, I found something else that would matter later. David's personnel file, left open on the supervisor's desk, probably not accidentally. His job title read, Senior Conservation Partner, with an annual salary of $85,000, funded directly through Morrison Trust operational grants. Not just an employee. A partner. My satellite phone rang. Amanda Foster again. Charlie, I have an update on the National Geographic Fellowship your son applied for. They've asked for additional references. Have they? The decision committee includes Dr. Sarah Williams. She's in Kenya this week for the International Wildlife Protection Summit. Might be worth mentioning. I glanced toward the main lodge, where Trevor was still holding court with his social media audience. Dr. Williams wouldn't happen to be staying nearby, would she? Actually, she's conducting research at Sunset Ridge this week. Small world, indeed. I found David at the communications center, reviewing tomorrow's game drive routes with his ranger team. When he saw me approaching, he stepped away from the group. Mr. Morrison, I hope this morning's excitement didn't concern you too much. No harm done, though I think my son might benefit from understanding how the Conservancy actually operates. David nodded slowly. Would you like me to arrange for him to meet Dr. Williams tomorrow? She's documenting the anti-poaching program we fund through the Trust Foundation. That might be educational. She could explain how the funding structure works, the donor partnership model, how decisions get made about wildlife protection priorities. Trevor would find that interesting. He's always been curious about conservation funding. It wasn't true, but it would be soon. That evening at dinner, Trevor regaled the other guests with embellished stories from his morning lion encounter. His follower count had jumped to 268,000, a significant spike that had him energized and performing even more aggressively. "Tomorrow I'm going deep into the most dangerous territory in the park," he announced. "The kind of footage that separates real wildlife photographers from weekend tourists." Dr. Fisher and I exchanged glances across the table. "Will you be working with the Conservancy's research team?" she asked innocently. "Research team?" "Dr. Sarah Williams is here this week documenting the anti-poaching program. Fascinating work. The funding structure for these operations is quite sophisticated." Trevor's interest was piqued. "Funding structure?" "Oh yes. Private donations, government partnerships, international conservation grants. The Morrison Trust alone contributes over $500,000 annually to this specific conservancy." Trevor looked genuinely surprised. "I had no idea there was that kind of money in conservation." "More than you might think," I said quietly. "Dad, what do you know about it?" "Just what I read." Dr. Fisher smiled. "Mr. Morrison seems quite knowledgeable about conservation funding for someone in park maintenance." An awkward pause. Trevor looked confused. "Maybe I could interview this Dr. Williams for my channel," he said. "Conservation funding could be good content." "I'm sure that could be arranged," David said, appearing at our table. "She'll be visiting our field station tomorrow morning. Perhaps you could join her team." "Perfect. This could be exactly the kind of professional connection I need." I nodded and finished my wine, knowing that tomorrow would bring revelations my son wasn't prepared for. Some doors, once opened, can never be closed again. The next morning brought the kind of perfect African weather that makes you understand why people spend fortunes to experience wilderness. Clear skies, temperature in the mid-70s, a light breeze carrying the scent of acacia blossoms. Trevor was already streaming live when I joined him for coffee at 6 a.m. "Morning, wildlife warriors. Today's the big day. I'm meeting with actual conservation scientists, getting behind-the-scenes access to real wildlife protection operations. This is the kind of content that's going to take my platform to the next level." His energy was infectious, and for a moment I felt genuinely proud of his enthusiasm, until he continued. "Of course, I'll have to work around my dad's limitations. He's not exactly built for serious fieldwork at his age." 73,000 people were watching live. The comment section was mixed. Support for his content, but increasing criticism of his treatment of me. David Reynolds appeared with our morning briefing. "Gentlemen, Dr. Williams is expecting you at the field research station at 9 a.m. It's about an hour's drive through some challenging terrain." "No problem," Trevor said confidently. "I've got the perfect vehicle for it." He gestured toward his Land Rover Defender, still gleaming despite yesterday's adventure. The $185,000 vehicle that he'd been so proud of, purchased with money he assumed was his own success. The drive to the research station took us deeper into the conservancy than most tourists ever travel. Raw, magnificent landscape where the only human presence was ranger stations positioned to protect the wildlife from poachers. Trevor filmed continuously, narrating for his audience about the extreme conditions and his professional-level expedition into dangerous territory. "This is what real wildlife photography looks like, people. Not everyone has the experience or equipment to handle this level of adventure." I watched the landscape roll past and thought about the 15 years I'd spent funding the infrastructure that made this adventure possible. The ranger stations, the communication networks, the vehicle maintenance facilities, the anti-poaching teams, all sustained by wire transfers from a small office in Portland that Trevor had never bothered to visit. "Dad, you're being awfully quiet back there. Try to look more excited for the camera. I'm enjoying the scenery. The scenery's incredible, right, guys?" Trevor addressed his phone screen. "Though I'm not sure my old man really appreciates how privileged we are to be here." The research station was a cluster of temporary structures around a natural water hole where elephants came to drink. Solar panels powered computers that tracked animal movements via collar GPS. Sophisticated equipment funded by grants I'd specifically established for wildlife monitoring technology. Dr. Sarah Williams was waiting for us, a woman in her mid-40s with the kind of calm confidence that comes from decades of field research. She wore practical khakis and a field vest marked with the logos of 3 international conservation organizations. "You must be Trevor Morrison," she said, offering a firm handshake. "I understand you're documenting conservation work for social media." "That's right. Almost 300,000 followers and growing. I'm really excited to learn about the funding side of wildlife protection." "Doctor." Williams glanced at me with the kind of look that suggested she knew exactly who I was. "And you must be Mr. Morrison Sr. I've heard quite a lot about your interest in conservation work." "I try to stay informed," I said. Trevor immediately began filming Dr. Williams as she explained the anti-poaching program's scope and budget. Her presentation was professional, detailed, and increasingly specific about funding sources. "This operation costs approximately $600,000 annually," she explained. "Personnel, equipment, vehicle maintenance, ranger training. Most conservation areas struggle to fund operations at this level." "Where does the money come from?" Trevor asked, genuinely curious now. "Private donors, primarily. The Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust provides the majority of our operational budget through a partnership established in 2009. Trevor lowered his camera slightly. "Morrison. Like our last name?" "Indeed." "The foundation was established by a donor who preferred to remain anonymous, but his impact on East African conservation has been extraordinary." I watched my son process this information. He was intelligent enough to understand the implications, but arrogant enough to dismiss them. "Interesting coincidence," he said finally. "So this anonymous Morrison person, he must be pretty wealthy." "Quite wealthy, and remarkably knowledgeable about conservation science. His funding has enabled us to protect over 200,000 acres across 3 countries. Trevor was filming again, sensing good content. "What kind of money are we talking about? Like ballpark?" "The Morrison Trust has donated over $15 million since its inception. This year alone, their contribution will exceed $3.2 million. Trevor's camera wavered. $3 million? This year? That's correct. The donor has been remarkably consistent and generous." "Has anyone ever met this mysterious Morrison guy?" Dr. Williams looked directly at me. "A few of us have had that privilege. He's not what you might expect." Trevor was getting excited now. "This could be incredible content. A mysterious millionaire funding African conservation. Do you have any photos of him? Any way to identify him?" "Actually," Dr. Williams said, walking toward a display board covered with photographs and documents, "I have several photos right here." She pointed to a series of images from various conservation events, foundation ceremonies, wildlife protection signings, ranger graduation ceremonies, all featuring me. Trevor stared at the photographs for a long moment. His social media audience was watching this unfold in real time, 85,000 viewers and climbing. That's my dad," he said slowly. "Is it?" Dr. Williams asked innocently. "But that's impossible. My dad was a park maintenance worker. He doesn't have that kind of money. He couldn't afford basic things when I was growing up." "Perhaps," Dr. Williams said gently, "you didn't have all the information about your father's priorities." Trevor turned to face me, his camera still recording. The comment section was exploding as viewers realized what they were witnessing. "Dad, what is this? How are you in these photos?" "I volunteer sometimes," I said calmly. "Volunteer? These photos show you signing official documents, meeting with government officials. Conservation is important to me." Trevor's face was flushing red with confusion and anger. "Are you telling me you've been lying to me? About money? About your job? About everything?" His audience was watching a family crisis unfold in real time. 90,000 viewers now. Comments pouring in faster than anyone could read them. "I never lied," I said. "You never asked." "I never asked? I never asked if my father was secretly a millionaire?" "You assumed I was poor," I said quietly. "I never corrected your assumptions." The camera was still rolling. Trevor's carefully constructed narrative about his self-made success was crumbling in front of his largest audience ever. "This is insane," he muttered. Then, louder, "This is absolutely insane." Dr. Williams stepped back diplomatically. "Perhaps I should give you gentlemen some privacy." "No," Trevor said quickly. "Keep talking. I want to know everything about this foundation, about the money, about what my father's been hiding." That's when I realized he still didn't understand. He thought this was about money he might inherit, opportunities he might access. He had no idea that everything was about to be taken away. The satellite phone in my pocket rang at exactly 10:30 a.m. Amanda Foster calling right on schedule. "Excuse me," I said, stepping away from Trevor and Dr. Williams. "I need to take this." Trevor followed me, his camera still recording. 95,000 viewers were watching live as his world reorganized around facts he'd never bothered to discover. "Amanda," I said, putting the call on speaker so my son could hear, "do you have those employment verification documents we discussed?" "Yes, Charlie. Everything's ready. The National Geographic Fellowship Review Committee is meeting this afternoon. They'll need final confirmation about Mr. Morrison's application status." Trevor's face went white. "National Geographic? Dad, what's she talking about?" "Mr. Trevor Morrison submitted an application for the Carter Wildlife Photography Fellowship 3 weeks ago." Amanda's voice was crisp and professional through the satellite connection. "The fellowship is funded entirely by the Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust. As foundation director, you have final approval authority over all recipients." I watched my son process this information. His mouth opened and closed soundlessly. "The fellowship includes a $75,000 annual stipend, full equipment budget, and guaranteed publication placement in National Geographic magazine," Amanda continued. "It's considered the most prestigious wildlife photography opportunity in the industry." Trevor found his voice. "Dad, is this real?" "Very real," I said. "The question is whether you've demonstrated the character and professionalism required for such a position." Dr. Williams approached with a folder full of documents. "Perhaps these would help clarify the situation, Mr. Morrison." She handed me the folder, but I passed it directly to Trevor. "Your audience might find this educational." Trevor opened the folder with shaking hands. His camera captured everything: the official letterhead, the legal seals, the financial statements. "Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust," he read aloud, "incorporated October 12, 2009. Founder and primary beneficiary, Charles William Morrison. Annual revenue, $3.2 million. His live stream chat was moving so fast the comments blurred together. 100,000 viewers now. "Board of Directors," he continued reading. "Charles Morrison, Chairman. Dr. Sarah Williams, Conservation Director. David Reynolds, Field Operations Partner." He looked up at Dr. Williams. "You work for my dad?" "With your father," she corrected. "The trust operates as a partnership between conservation scientists and the funding foundation." Trevor flipped through more pages. Bank statements showing regular transfers. Letters of agreement with wildlife services in Kenya, Tanzania, and Botswana. Photographs of me with presidents, prime ministers, and Nobel Peace Prize winners. "This says you've donated $15 million, he whispered. "Over 15 years, I confirmed. "Conservation is expensive work." "But where did the money come from? You were a park maintenance worker." David Reynolds appeared beside us, carrying another folder. "Actually, Trevor, your father was Senior Conservation Systems Engineer for the Pacific Northwest Regional Authority. He designed wildlife corridor systems for 3 states. The patents on his water management innovations have generated substantial royalties." Trevor stared at him. "Patents?" 17 of them, David said. "Licensed to municipalities and conservation areas worldwide. Your father's engineering work has protected wildlife habitats across 4 continents." "I don't understand any of this," Trevor said, his voice cracking. His social media performance was completely forgotten now as he confronted the collapse of everything he thought he knew. "There's more," Dr. Williams said gently. She opened her own folder and spread photographs across the hood of our Land Rover. "Your father has been personally involved in conservation work since before you were born." The photograph showed my evolution from young engineer to seasoned conservationist, designing water systems in Yellowstone in the 1990s, consulting with park services in Costa Rica, meeting with the African Wildlife Foundation in 2008. The progression was clear and documented. "He's been living a double life," Trevor said to his camera, which was still broadcasting to over 100,000 viewers. "My entire childhood, he was pretending to be poor while secretly funding conservation projects around the world." "Not pretending," I said quietly. "Choosing. I could have lived lavishly and funded nothing, or I could live simply and fund meaningful work. I chose meaningful work." "But why didn't you tell me? Why let me believe we had no money?" "Because money given to children often destroys their character," I said. I wanted to see what kind of man you'd become on your own." The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. 108,000 people watched my son grapple with the revelation that his entire self-image had been constructed on incomplete information. "The National Geographic Fellowship," he said finally. "You could approve my application." "I could," I agreed. Hope flickered in his eyes. "This could change everything. Dad, this is incredible. With your connections, your funding, we could build something amazing together." That's when I realized he still didn't understand the most important part. "Trevor," I said gently, "there's something else you need to know." I pulled out my own phone and opened the live stream app. His channel, his audience, his performance from the past 2 days. 112,000 people just watched you abandon your father to lions while calling him pathetic dead weight. They watched you disrespect wildlife safety protocols for social media content. They watched you publicly humiliate the man who has quietly funded the conservation work you claim to care about. Trevor's face went gray as he understood. "Your application for the fellowship was actually quite strong," I continued. "Your portfolio is professional, your references were solid, your conservation knowledge is genuine. I was prepared to approve it." "Was? Character matters in conservation work, Trevor. Trust matters. Respect for wildlife and for people matters." Dr. Williams spoke quietly. "The fellowship committee has specific requirements about professional conduct and personal integrity." "What does that mean?" Trevor asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "It means," I said, reaching for my satellite phone, "that your behavior over the past 48 hours has disqualified you from consideration." I dialed Amanda's number, put the call on speaker again. "Amanda, I need you to send the rejection letter for the National Geographic Fellowship application. Mr. Trevor Morrison does not meet our character requirements for foundation-funded positions." "Understood," Amanda said professionally. "I'll also need to update the Conservancy partnership agreements. Should I remove Mr. Trevor Morrison from all future consideration lists?" I looked at my son. 115,000 people were listening to this conversation in real time. "Yes," I said. "Remove him from all lists." Trevor's camera slipped from his hands and clattered to the ground. The live stream continued, broadcasting the African sky as audio of our conversation continued. "Dad, please. I didn't know. If I had known who you really were—" "That's exactly the problem," I said. "Your respect was conditional on what you thought I could do for you. Real respect isn't transactional." Dr. Williams and David Reynolds stepped back discreetly, giving us privacy for what was clearly a family crisis playing out in front of more people than most television shows reach. "The Conservancy vehicles, the equipment, the access to restricted areas," I continued, "all funded through the Foundation, all contingent on professional standards and respectful conduct." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying your safari privileges are revoked. David will arrange for your transport back to Nairobi tomorrow morning." Trevor looked around desperately, at the research station his father had funded, at the conservation scientists his father worked with, at the Land Rover Defender that had been purchased with Foundation money he never knew existed. "This isn't fair," he said finally. "Fair?" I asked. "You spent 2 days publicly humiliating your father for an audience. You called me dead weight. You abandoned me to dangerous wildlife for entertainment. You prioritized social media content over safety protocols. What part of the situation do you think is unfair?" 120,000 people waited for his answer. He had none. The silence stretched for almost a full minute, while Trevor stood among the scattered documents that had just rewritten his understanding of everything. His phone continued broadcasting from the ground, audio only now, capturing every word of what would become the most watched wildlife conservation content of the year. "David," I said finally, "could you please contact Amanda and have her prepare the revised partnership documentation?" "Of course, Mr. Morrison. Should I include the equipment inventory and vehicle registration transfers?" "Yes. All Foundation assets need to be properly documented." Trevor looked up sharply. "Vehicle registration transfers?" I walked over to his Land Rover Defender and ran my hand along the pristine paint job. "This vehicle was purchased with a Foundation grant for conservation field research. Registration is in the Foundation's name, not yours." "That's impossible. I bought this truck." David opened his tablet and pulled up a document. Morrison Wildlife Heritage Trust Purchase Order 7749. Land Rover Defender 130, equipped for safari operations. Purchase price $185,400. He handed the tablet to Trevor, who stared at the screen with growing horror. Purchased for the use of Foundation-sponsored wildlife photographers conducting approved research projects, David continued. Usage requires maintaining professional standards and Foundation ethical guidelines. You're taking my truck? I'm reclaiming Foundation property, I corrected. The truck was always owned by the trust, like the camera equipment, the safari bookings, and the conservancy access permits. Trevor's livestream audience had swelled to nearly 130,000 viewers as word spread across social media. Comments were pouring in faster than anyone could read, a mix of shock, support for my position, and criticism of Trevor's behavior. My satellite phone rang again. This time it was Dr. Williams' colleague from the International Wildlife Protection Alliance. Charlie, Sarah just filled me in on the situation. We need to discuss the Kenyan Wildlife Service partnership renewals. I put the call on speaker, knowing Trevor needed to hear this. Of course, Margaret. What's the timeline? The 5-year agreements expire in January. Renewal requires unanimous approval from all partner organizations, plus verification that field protocols have been maintained. Trevor was following this conversation with increasing panic. I'm afraid we've had some protocol violations this week, I said. Unauthorized wildlife interference, safety violations, disrespectful conduct toward local conservation staff? Serious violations? Documented on social media. Over 100,000 witnesses. Margaret's sigh was audible through the satellite connection. That's unfortunate. We'll need to review the partnership terms. Conservation work requires absolute adherence to professional standards. After ending the call, I turned to Dr. Williams. Sarah, could you explain to Trevor what these partnership renewals mean for conservation funding in the region? Dr. Williams looked uncomfortable but spoke clearly. The Morrison Trust's partnerships with government wildlife services are the foundation that allows private conservation work throughout East Africa. If those partnerships are jeopardized by unprofessional conduct from associated personnel, the entire program could be defunded, I finished. Trevor was beginning to understand the scope of what his behavior had potentially damaged. Dad, I had no idea. If I had known the conservation work you were doing... You've had 24 hours to see exactly what I was doing, I interrupted. You met Dr. Williams. You saw the research station. You heard about the funding. Your response was to perform for social media instead of learning about conservation. I pulled out my phone and opened his live stream from yesterday. Should we review some of your commentary? The audio played back Trevor's voice. Hopefully my old man can keep up with the real wildlife photographers. Dad's being modest about his meaningless maintenance job. I need you to try not to embarrass me in front of the cameras. 135,000 people were listening to this evidence of his disrespect played back in real time. The National Geographic Fellowship wasn't just a career opportunity, I continued. It was a chance to contribute to conservation science, to work with people like Dr. Williams on projects that matter, to use your genuine talent for wildlife photography in service of something larger than social media metrics. Trevor's phone battery was finally dying, but the live stream continued through his backup power bank. His audience wasn't going anywhere. Instead, you treated conservation work as content creation. You treated professional scientists as props for your performance. You treated your father as an embarrassment to be managed. David Reynolds stepped forward with a clipboard. Mr. Morrison, I have the transport arrangements. There's a flight from Nairobi to Portland tomorrow evening. I can have Trevor at the airport by 3 p.m. That won't be necessary, I said. Trevor can make his own travel arrangements. With what money? Trevor asked quietly. Your social media earnings, your photography income. The success you built entirely through your own efforts. The implications hit him visibly. No foundation funding, no conservation connections, no access to private conservancies, no letters of recommendation from Dr. Williams or other scientists, no fellowship opportunity, just his talent, his audience, and whatever genuine support his content had earned. This is really happening, he said, more to himself than to anyone else. This is really happening, I confirmed. Amanda Foster's voice crackled through my satellite phone speaker as she called back with updates. Charlie, the rejection letters are sent. I've also canceled the Foundation credit cards and revoked access to the Portland office. Should I draft a press statement about the fellowship decision? No press statement necessary, I said. The applicant has already made the situation quite public. Trevor looked around at the African landscape he'd been so excited to conquer for content. Tomorrow he'd be leaving it behind, with nothing to show for his safari except viral footage of his own character defects. "Dad," he said finally, "what happens now?" "Now," I said, "you learn what respect actually costs." The next 18 hours unfolded with the methodical precision of a conservation operation, which, in a way, it was. I was conserving dignity, respect, and professional integrity by removing elements that threatened the ecosystem. Trevor spent most of the evening in his tent, presumably dealing with the social media firestorm that had erupted. His live stream had ended abruptly when his equipment died, but screen recordings and clips had spread across every platform. #RespectYourParents was trending on Twitter. #ConservationKarma had over 50,000 posts on Instagram. The comments on his original safari content had shifted dramatically. Where he'd once received praise for his authentic adventure content, people were now questioning everything about his character and credentials. "Imagine disrespecting the man who funds the entire preserve you're visiting," read one comment with 12,000 likes. "This is why we need to teach young people about humility," read another. "The quiet ones aren't weak. They're just secure enough not to need validation from strangers." By morning, Trevor's follower count had dropped from 268,000 to 193,000. 75,000 people had unfollowed him overnight. But the consequences extended far beyond social media metrics. At breakfast, Dr. Williams approached our table with updates from her colleagues in the conservation community. "Charlie, I've been in contact with the fellowship review committees at WWF, Conservation International, and the Smithsonian." Trevor looked up from his untouched coffee. "All three organizations have removed Mr. Trevor Morrison from their candidate consideration lists," she continued. "Word travels quickly in conservation circles, especially when behavior is documented so thoroughly." "That seems appropriate," I said. Trevor's face was pale. "All three? Those were my backup opportunities." "Character references matter in this field," Dr. Williams explained gently. "Trust and professionalism are essential when working with endangered species and local communities." After breakfast, David Reynolds provided Trevor with his final paperwork: transport arrangements to Nairobi International Airport, receipt of Foundation property surrender, including the Land Rover keys, camera equipment with Foundation serial numbers, and Conservancy access credentials. "There is one option," David said carefully. "If Mr. Trevor wanted to demonstrate a genuine change in character, he could apply for volunteer positions with community conservation groups. Unpaid work, minimum 6-month commitment, supervised by senior staff." Trevor looked at me hopefully. "That would be entirely his decision," I said. "No Foundation involvement, no family connections, just his willingness to learn from people he previously dismissed." "I'll consider it," Trevor said quietly. The drive to Nairobi took 4 hours through spectacular landscape that Trevor barely photographed. Without the expensive equipment and Foundation-funded access, he was just another tourist looking out a window. "Dad," he said as we approached the airport, "I want you to know I understand what happened." I waited for him to continue. "I was so focused on proving I was successful that I never asked what success actually meant. I thought wealth was about consumption and performance. I didn't realize it could be about contribution and impact. What are you going to do now?" "I don't know yet. I need to figure out who I am without the connections and funding I didn't know I had." At the airport departure gate, Trevor made one final request. "Could I have a photo of us together? Not for social media, just for me." I agreed. We stood together in front of the departure board, two men who looked like father and son but were really strangers learning to understand each other. "Trevor," I said as his boarding group was called, "the Foundation does fund educational scholarships for conservation students. If you ever want to study wildlife biology or sustainable resource management legitimately, that opportunity exists. Through application and merit. Through application and merit. No family preference. No guaranteed outcomes." He nodded. "I think I'd like that. Someday." As his plane taxied away from the gate, I called Amanda Foster with updates. "How did he take it?" she asked. "Better than expected. Worse than hoped." "And the conservation partnerships?" secure. Dr. Williams confirmed that our professional protocols remain intact. If anything, this incident demonstrated our commitment to maintaining standards regardless of personal relationships. That's important for the Foundation's reputation. It's important for conservation work, period. Wildlife protection requires absolute integrity from everyone involved. The next morning, back at Sunset Ridge, I walked alone through the conservancy at sunrise. The landscape that had been a backdrop for Trevor's performance was simply itself again, vast, ancient, and indifferent to human drama. But the infrastructure remained. The ranger stations, the research facilities, the anti-poaching operations, the educational programs. Work that mattered, continuing regardless of family complications. My satellite phone showed 17 missed calls from Trevor over the past 24 hours. I wasn't ready to answer them yet. Consequences needed time to teach their lessons properly. 6 months later, I received a letter. Not an email or a text, but an actual handwritten letter on recycled paper, mailed from a post office in rural Guatemala. "Dear Dad," it began, "I'm writing this from a sea turtle conservation project on the Pacific coast. I've been volunteering here for 4 months, cleaning beaches, monitoring nests, learning from marine biologists who couldn't care less about my social media following." The letter continued for 3 pages. Trevor described waking up at 5 a.m. to patrol beaches for poacher activity, learning Spanish from local conservationists, sleeping in basic dormitories and eating simple meals, living on the money he'd saved from his genuine photography work. "I finally understand what you were trying to teach me," he wrote. "Real impact doesn't need an audience. Respect is earned through consistency, not performance. And some of the most important work happens when nobody's watching." The letter included no requests for money, connections, or forgiveness. Just updates on his work and a single question. "Would you be willing to receive occasional letters about what I'm learning?" I wrote back the same day, "Yes, I would welcome letters." And if his commitment to conservation work continued beyond volunteer tourism, if he demonstrated genuine change over time, we might discuss opportunities for earned collaboration, boundaries established, respect redefined, relationship rebuilt on character rather than assumptions. If you're dealing with family members who take you for granted, remember, teaching respect sometimes requires withdrawing privileges they never knew they hadn't earned. Where are you watching from? Let me know in the comments below.